Every single human being on this planet today is descended from black-skinned ancestors who lived in Africa. Every single one. So somewhere along the way, some of us turned white. Not tan. Not brown. And the reason isn't what you've been taught in school. It's not just, they moved somewhere cold. That's the textbook answer, and it's barely half the story. The real answer involves a vitamin, a vulture-like disease, a genetic mutation that shouldn't have worked, and one shocking timeline twist. It happened far more recently than you think. By the end of this video, you'll understand why skin color changed at all, why it took tens of thousands of years, and why, genetically speaking, race is one of the shakiest concepts humans ever invented. Let's get into it. Let's rewind about 300,000 years. Homo sapiens shows up in Africa, near the equator, under some of the most intense sunlight on Earth. And here's the twist most people don't know. Our early ancestors probably weren't dark-skinned at all. They were likely pale, underneath a coat of thick body hair, just like chimpanzees, our closest living relatives. Then something happened that changed everything. We lost our fur. Nobody knows the exact trigger, but the leading theory is that our ancestors started running, hunting on foot, chasing prey across open savanna for hours. Running generates heat, and a thick coat of hair traps that heat in. Losing the fur let us sweat more efficiently and cool down. It's a big reason humans became one of the best endurance runners on the planet. But losing fur created a brand new problem. Bare skin, directly under equatorial sun, is a magnet for ultraviolet radiation. And UV radiation is dangerous. It destroys folate, a nutrient your body desperately needs for cell division, for healthy pregnancies, for basic DNA repair. Without enough folate, birth defects skyrocket and fertility drops. So evolution needed a sunscreen. And it found one: melanin. Melanin is the pigment that makes skin dark. It acts like a natural, built-in sunblock, absorbing and scattering UV rays before they can damage the DNA inside skin cells. The humans with more melanin survived better, reproduced more successfully, and passed that trait on. Within a relatively short evolutionary window, humanity became uniformly dark-skinned. For hundreds of thousands of years, that was simply what a human looked like. Around 70,000 years ago, groups of these dark-skinned humans began walking out of Africa. They pushed into the Middle East, then Central Asia, then Europe, regions with dramatically weaker sunlight, shorter days, and long, gray winters. And that's where dark skin, the very trait that had kept them alive for so long, became a liability. Here's why. Human skin doesn't just block UV radiation. It also uses UV radiation to manufacture vitamin D, a nutrient essential for absorbing calcium, building strong bones, and keeping the immune system running properly. In a place like equatorial Africa, sunlight is so intense that even heavily melanated skin still lets in enough UV to make sufficient vitamin D. But move that same skin to, say, modern-day Scandinavia, where winter sunlight is weak and scarce, and dark skin starts blocking too much UV. Not enough vitamin D gets made. The result was devastating: rampant vitamin D deficiency, leading to a bone-softening disease called rickets. Rickets causes deformed bones, weakened pelvises, and, critically, it made childbirth more dangerous and often fatal for both mother and baby. In evolutionary terms, that's about as strong a selection pressure as you can get. Any mutation that let more UV through the skin, to make more vitamin D, suddenly became incredibly valuable in these low sunlight regions. Here's where it gets genuinely wild. Losing pigmentation wasn't one single event. It happened through several separate genetic mutations in different populations at different times that all converged on the same outcome: lighter skin. One of the biggest players is a gene called SLC24A5. A single change in this gene reduces melanin production, and researchers have found this specific variant in the vast majority of modern Europeans. But, and this is the part that surprises almost everyone, that mutation appears to have spread and become dominant only around 8,000 to 12,000 years ago. Let that sink in. For the majority of the roughly 40,000 years that dark-skinned humans lived in Europe, they stayed dark-skinned. Ancient DNA recovered from skeletons proves this. A famous specimen known as Cheddar Man, a Briton who lived about 10,000 years ago in what is now England, has been genetically reconstructed, and the data indicates he likely had dark skin, dark hair, and light-colored eyes. Dark skin in ancient Britain. Not exactly the image most people picture. So why the long delay? For most of that time, ancient Europeans were hunter-gatherers, and their diet, heavy in fish and wild game, was already naturally rich in vitamin D. They didn't need lighter skin because their food was solving the problem for them. Then agriculture arrived. Around 10,000 years ago, humans across Europe and Asia began shifting away from hunting and gathering toward farming grain-based diets: wheat, barley, rice. Grains are cheap sources of calories, but they're almost completely lacking in vitamin D. Suddenly, an entire dietary safety net disappeared. Populations that had survived just fine with dark skin for tens of thousands of years were now at serious risk of vitamin D deficiency because their new farming diets gave them almost none of it, and their skin was still too effective at blocking the weak sunlight from making up the difference. This is the real trigger. Not just moving to a colder place. It was moving to a colder place and changing what humans ate. That combination created overwhelming pressure for lighter skin, and it explains the timeline perfectly. The genetic evidence shows pale skin spreading rapidly across Europe right around the same time farming spread across Europe. It's not a coincidence, it's cause and effect. Meanwhile, in East Asia, a completely different set of mutations, involving genes like OCA2, were independently producing lighter skin in local populations, for very similar sunlight and diet reasons. Evolution essentially solved the same problem twice, using two different genetic toolkits, in two different parts of the world. So here's the real takeaway. Skin color isn't some ancient, fixed marker of deep tribal identity. It's a relatively recent, surface-level adaptation to two variables: how strong the sunlight is where your ancestors lived, and how much vitamin D was already in their diet. Change the environment, and skin color changes with it, over thousands of years. Change the diet, and the timeline shifts too. It's a beautifully simple biological equation, layered on top of an incredibly complex human story. Every shade of human skin on Earth today is the same underlying solution to the same underlying problem, just tuned to a different latitude and a different plate of food. And genetically, the differences involved are almost laughably small. A handful of gene variants, out of the roughly 20,000 genes that make a human. We are far, far more alike than we are different, and the story of skin color proves it. If this blew your mind a little, that's exactly the goal of this channel. Taking the stuff we think we already understand and showing you how much stranger and more interesting the real story actually is. Drop a comment. If you could trace your own ancestry back 10,000 years, where do you think you'd end up? Subscribe if you want more deep dives like this one, and I'll see you in the next video.